Good morning or good afternoon or evening. I don't know where it is, where everybody's calling in from, but welcome everybody. And you can turn your microphones on. I wouldn't mind having a conversation with people. So if you want to say hello, that'd be great.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing?
Doing well.
Good morning.
Good.
Pretty
Good. So before I get started, I'd just like to get a little bit of a sense of where people are at in terms of their homeopathic studies. Are you like fairly new, beginners, or are you, hey Ian, or are you more advanced practitioners, or just so I have a little bit of a sense of who I'm speaking to?
I'm just finishing up the practitioner program.
Okay, great, wonderful.
And I graduated from the Minnesota program about 10 years ago, and I've been
wonderful, great. So you've got some background.
Yes.
Yeah.
Enough
Okay.
to have
Good.
questions.
Are there any newbies on the call? Just so I know, any people who are. Kim, you're a
Fairly
newbie?
new. I'm fairly new. I'm new to the school. I'm not new to homeopathy, but yeah, I consider myself a beginner.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just go ahead and get started. Yeah,
good morning.
Yeah,
I'm new as well, and I'm new to the school, so I'm a beginner.
Okay. Rachel, is that
Good morning. Yes, good morning, everybody.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Good morning to you as well. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll just get started, and I welcome you to interject at any point if you have any questions or something's not clear. The whole subject of potency and dose is a very large one. I've taught whole weekend seminars specifically on this topic, so there's a lot to say about it. But what I'd like to do is just kind of go through different aspects of potency and dose and give you some case examples from my own practice and have a dialogue with you about it, because you may have your own experiences relative to potency and dose that might be quite valuable as part of our discussion.
Excuse me?
Again, I welcome you to participate and enter into a dialogue with me about this and certainly ask any questions. Yes, please.
Kim, I'm so sorry, but your voice is unclear for me. I don't know if it is for others.
How is it for everybody else?
It's good. It's small.
I can hear. I can't see you.
I can hear good.
Yeah, now you can see me.
There it is.
I have a new computer, and it's been a total disaster. I can't even begin to tell you. So, in any case, I'll go ahead and I'll get started, and we'll go through the cases and have discussions. And feel free to ask any questions at any point. Either questions of clarification or things that you'd like to delve in more deeply. I'm open to really looking at any aspect of this topic, or really any aspect of homeopathic practice that you'd like to discuss. Okay, so I wanted to start by reading this quote from the International Homœopathy Association. I don't know how many people are familiar with this particular publication. It ran from 1881 through 1927, and it was a very important organization that held up the high standards of homeopathy and homeopathy. And they did publish these transactions, and you'll find fantastic information. And here's one. You probably are familiar with E.B. Nash, Eugenio Boharis Nash. And this is from the 1925 issue of the IHA. And he writes, when Dr. E.B. Nash was beginning his medical career, he was stricken with paralysis. He took laxatives, but it only helped. Discouraged, he reached Dr. Lippe, Adolf Lippe, a great master, and the venerable doctor gave him a remedy and told him, when you are cured, come back and I'll tell you what I gave you. And then Dr. Nash later returned to Philadelphia, and he says, here I am, entirely well now. What was it? And Lippe responded, laxatives. Laxatives? Yes, but I took laxatives. And the old Dr. Lippe jumped up and down in his delight and laughing said, you did not take it high enough. And I like this story to start off our discussion because there are many homeopathic practitioners out there, educators even, who will tell you that potency and dose really are not all that important. It's much more important to find the correct remedy. And then, whatever potency and dose you give, it really won't make much of a difference. As long as it's the correct remedy, you'll get good results. And there might be some truth to that, but I think that there is also great value in understanding potency and dose and applying it most effectively. Let me ask people a question. For you, what's the most important aphorism in the Organon? Anybody have an aphorism that they particularly think is very, very important? Any out there?
I can't answer because I couldn't hear the question.
Okay, I asked if anybody felt that there was a particular aphorism from the Organon which was particularly important.
To do no harm.
To do no harm. Okay, so that's aphorism 2, right? Right, that's Hahnemann talks about that in aphorism 2, and of course that is extremely important, but I would actually argue that the most important aphorism is aphorism 1, the one where Hahnemann says that the responsibility of the physician is to cure as it is termed, and that supersedes everything else. You got to get what your objective is to help the patient to get well, right? And everything's got to be secondary to that. Now, I would argue, Audrey, that the second most important aphorism in the Organon is aphorism 2, where he says not only do you want to cure the patient, but you want to do it rapidly, gently, and permanently, right? So that is where you look at the issue of potency and dose, because if you don't apply the correct potency and doses, you may still be able to cure your patients, but you may not always do it gently. You may not do it as rapidly as you could have, and sometimes the permanent results that you're looking for may not be achieved because of the potency and dose selections that you made. So that's why it's very important to look at potency and dose. And I thought we could start by simply looking at a case, and I would give you an example of my own thinking of how I choose potency and dose in each of my cases that I see in practice, okay? So let's go ahead and start by reading the case. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll read through the case, we'll look at it together, and then I'll ask you for your thoughts about the case in terms of what remedies you think are important, how you're going to approach it, what symptoms you think we should focus on, or anything else that you feel is relevant to this particular case. So this is a case of bipolar disorder. Jack is a 37-year-old man who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 5 years previously. For the last 3 years, he's been taking Lithivit, that's lithium carbonate, and he's been taking 1,800 milligrams a day to even out his swings between really extreme depression and also introversion and a manic state which is characterized by extreme excessiveness. Now, this medication, the Lithivit that Jack is taking, has evened out his previous mood swings, but he now complains of often feeling tired, dull, and drowsy. And in the last few years, he's put on at least 30 pounds. Now, any thoughts or comments about this so far? In terms of what's written here, any ideas, anything that you would take into consideration or think about with this opening scenario?
Yes, I would say that what he's experiencing right now with the tired, dull, drowsy, and the weight gain is part of the medication. It's one of the side effects.
Very good. Excellent. That's very good. And I agree, you know, putting on weight is very common with Lithivit, as is feeling dull and drowsy. So these are symptoms of the medication, which we should be aware of. Anything else?
What does he mean by extreme excessiveness? What does that?
It'll be described in just a minute.
Oh,
so
okay.
You'll see. Yeah, but that's a good question. But yeah, because that's just a very general description. I think for me, the other thing to think about is that he's taking this medication, and if ultimately he's going to be well, I'm going to have to somehow wean him off that medication, right? It's just not going to be possible for him to be well and continue to take this medication. So that is something that I have to take into consideration. Okay, let's continue. Before the onset of the mood swings around the age of 32, Jack had been relatively healthy. He had been diagnosed with hepatitis A when he was around 17 years old, and since that time has never had regular bowel movements. He manages his constipation by taking various laxatives, which either contain Cascara sagrada senna or a combination of the two. He has also had a number of back problems which are not diagnosed, but which seem to resemble sciatica in certain respects. The back problems come and go, and the most characteristic thing about them is that the symptoms are variable. Sometimes he experiences sharp stabbing pains along the back of the thigh and calf. Sometimes he'll feel an aching sensation to the right of the coccyx. even, oops, sorry, even, sometimes he experiences sharp stabbing pains along the back of the thigh and calf, sometimes with feeling aching sensation to the right of the coccyx. Even though he's seen a number of chiropractors, Chinese medical doctors, naturopaths, etc., what has been most effective in minimizing the discomfort has been eating a diet low in fats, sugar, and processed foods. Jack also gets terrible migraine headaches about 2 to 3 times a month, and they will usually happen if he strays from his mostly raw food diet, and especially if he eats a lot of fats. The headaches will usually last 4 or 5 hours, but in some cases can last the entire day, and the headaches are often accompanied by a feeling of nausea. Okay, let me go down here. Sorry, I have a new computer, so I have to figure all this out. Okay. Even though Jack's mood swings have been flattened out by the lift a bit, he does not feel good. Those were his exact words. He feels as if a spark of his life energy has been stripped from his soul, and he would like to get off the medication without going back to the extreme mood swings he was experiencing previously. Jack's physician has been interested in more natural health approaches and has expressed his support for Jack to seek out some alternatives, including homeopathy. Before the medication, Jack's emotional swings were extreme. He would go through periods of deep depression, introversion, and feeling of wanting to end his life. During these periods, he would have very strong feelings of self-loathing. He said he felt as if he hated himself. These feelings were always worse in the morning, especially immediately after waking up. And during these periods, his whole life energy would become suppressed. Even his normally high sex drive would be lower during these periods. And this speaks to what you were asking earlier, Audrey, during the manic phase, he would become extremely extroverted, highly sexual, and excessive. He would tend to party a lot, have a lot of sexual encounters, and experiment with a lot of different drugs, most especially marijuana and sometimes ecstasy and other psychedelics. He could be very irresponsible during this phase, not paying his bills, procrastinating a lot with regard to his life responsibilities, and becoming very self-centered and selfish. Jack tends to be more chilly than warm and can't stand cold, dry weather. His preference is for warm, humid weather. He likes almost any kind of food, but especially tasty foods with lots of salt, spices, and fat. He also loves fruit, especially citrus. He said, "I can eat a case of oranges." He has an aversion to most brassicas, but can tolerate Chinese broccoli. He also doesn't like eggplant. He tends to be reasonably thirsty and will drink cold water or orange juice with ice cubes in it. He will also chew the ice cubes, which makes his current girlfriend crazy. Sometimes he will perspire during sleep and soak the sheets. This happens about 2 to 3 times a month. He also has a tendency to grind his teeth during sleep. Jack usually goes to sleep around 9 to 10 p.m. and wakes up between 4 to 5 a.m. The soles of his feet are extremely sensitive. Jack can't walk barefoot on a beach, which even has a few rocks. Jack is excessive in everything he does. If he gets involved in something new, whatever it is, he will throw himself completely into the new venture until he gets bored and moves on to something else. He will then become obsessed without becoming completely absorbed until he moves on to the next thing. Jack has a very high sex drive and says when he was younger, he would masturbate up to 20 times a day. Okay, so that's the case. So I would love to hear, before there are any suggestions for remedies, I would love to hear from you any thoughts about what you feel is important in this case. What would you focus on? What symptoms would you pay attention to? What rubrics might you consider including in your anamnesis? That's the type of information I'd like to hear from you. So please feel free to share.
Yeah, this is Samir Vermani from San Diego. Hi, Kim. How are you doing?
Hi, Samir. Welcome.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes across in this case is, you know, this extreme excessiveness and everything is over the top and these extremes and just how, you know, everything's excessive over the top here and not able to maintain a balance. And that thought sort of runs through the entire case from, you know, everything about his obsessions to his high sex drive to, you know, the way he gets involved in something new. And this ice craving and, you know, everything, oranges and everything just points to a very highly psychotic nature to this case, along with the eggplant aversion. So seems like on a higher level, at least, I mean, something very deeply psychotic is going on in this case, with the sensitivity to soles of the feet on walking as well. Like all these symptoms are extremely psychotic in nature. That's
Yeah.
what.
And you're saying psychotic with an S, correct? Not with a P.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The
Just want to be sure. Okay.
the homeopathy psychosis, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Excellent. And I would say I would even add a little bit to that. It's not just excessiveness. It's a movement between excessiveness and also kind of an introversion. So he's
Yeah,
swinging.
unable to maintain a balance, you know. And
Yeah.
going
Exactly.
extremes, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very, very good. That's a very good analysis of the situation. Any other suggestions or thoughts? Okay, well, what about remedies? Any thoughts for remedies?
Medurinum screams to me, but
Yeah. Okay, medurinum is obviously a very, very good choice. Are there any other thoughts that anybody would like to put forward as a possible remedy?
I don't have a remedy thought in particular, but with this extremeness and the going back and forth, also it's striking me that the modalities are quite clear and strong. And so in looking for the remedy, I would give more weight to those modalities because they're so marked.
Okay, good. So listen, Samir made some very good points, as you did as well. And, you know, if you look at this case, right, you could make a very good argument for medurinum. You've got the soles of the feet are sensitive, which is a keynote of medurinum. He chews the ice cubes, which is a keynote of medurinum. He craves citrus, and especially oranges, which is a keynote of medurinum. He swings between extremes, which is very characteristic of medurinum. So there's a lot here to argue for medurinum, but there is a couple of things here which don't fit medurinum all that well. One is that he tends to go to sleep early and wakes up early, and medurinums are characteristically these night people. You know, they get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go out, you know, to parties and meet women and men and women and men and do drugs and you know, go to sleep at noon and wake up. You know, that's the cycle we normally see, which is not what we're seeing here. And this is a chilly patient, and generally we see that medurinum is a warm-blooded remedy. So what do we do with that?
Okay.
I mean, those are strong symptoms that we normally, or characteristics that we normally associate with medurinum, which are not in this case. Is that a problem? Is it?
I don't, I mean, somehow, like, this is Samir again. I mean, I think that, like, if we go to, like, aggravation from cold and all these things, medurinum has some of those states as well. So, I mean, I don't see that as a contraindication for medurinum. I mean, it would have been nice if he was warm-blooded, but I don't see that as a contraindication of medurinum. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you that there is his sleep cycle is a little bit sort of early sleeper and waking up early, but then maybe he's waking up very early at 4 or 5 in the morning, because that's also an aggravation time of medurinum, you know. So it's like,
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree with anything you said, Samir. From my point of view, the bottom line is there is no better remedy choice that I'm aware of. So the symptoms don't all have to match. Hahnemann actually says this in Aphorism 156 of the Organon. He says that you will never find a situation, or almost never find a situation, where the symptoms match perfectly, which is why you get dissimilar symptoms in the case that pop up when you give a remedy, even the best remedy, because it doesn't exactly match like the equal angles of a triangle. So the fact that some symptoms don't match is not an issue for me, unless I can find another remedy which is a better choice. But I simply don't find a remedy which is that better fits this case than medurinum. So I have to give medurinum. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, so medurinum came out to be the most similar medicine to the case.
Exactly. I don't see another remedy that better fits this case. Okay. And even though certain symptoms which are very normally characteristic of medurinum are actually contraindicated in this case, it doesn't matter, because what am I going to do if I can't find a better remedy? I have to give the best choice from the list of available ones. So I think, you know, most people probably would give Metarhyme in this case. But remember, the purpose of this particular class is not to find the remedies, but to talk about potency and dose. So let's look at that particular issue from the perspective of this particular case, okay? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Good. So these are some of the criteria that I use to determine potency and dose, okay? And I'll review each of them, and we'll go through a number of cases, and I'll show you how I apply them in any particular case. So the first one is the certainty of the remedy. The more confident I am that this is a really good remedy, just the more I feel in my gut that this is the one, that this is the simillimum, and this is going to do the trick, the higher I'm willing to go in potency. The less confident I am about the remedy, the lower in potency I will tend to go. Now, it's important to remember that all of these criteria are weighed against each other, so I have to factor all of them in relationship one to the other in determining the final potency and dose selection. The second determinant factor that I'll look at is the sensitivity of the patient, and this relates to aphorism 2 that was mentioned earlier. If I've got a very highly sensitive individual, I am going to avoid using the higher potencies because I want to avoid aggravations, and I want to basically follow what Hahnemann recommends in aphorism 2, that we do whatever we do gently. So if the patient's very sensitive, I will go with a much lower potency, and if they tend to be of normal sensitivity or hyposensitivity, then I will feel very comfortable using the higher potencies. Now, how will I know the sensitivity of the patient? Can anybody tell me that? How will I make that determination?
I mean, in general, the sensitivity of the patient in the symptoms, you know, if he's like sensitive to a lot of things, like a lot of stimuli in the environment, a lot of foods, and every little thing impacts the patient, then that general sensitivity thread should also extend to his sensitivity to the homeopathic remedies too.
Yeah, very good. You've taken the patient's case, so you've asked all these questions about their various sensitivities to foods, to weather, to temperature changes. So you have a sense of their sensitivity, and if you've selected a remedy based on the remedy that you've chosen, that can also give you an indication of their sensitivity. Because if you've given them, or if you've chosen nitric acid or phosphorus or nux vomica, well, they're more likely going to be very sensitive because those are remedies that tend to be quite sensitive. If you've given them Helleborus or Cocculus or Plumbum, then, you know, there's a chance that they're not going to be that sensitive because those are remedies that tend to have a lack of sensitivity to things in their environment. So you'll know by having taken their case and by the remedy that you've given. This is very, very important to assess the sensitivity of the patient in determining potency and dose. The third criteria that I would look at would be the nature of the remedy. Now, I put this in here because a lot of the old-time homeopathic authors and practitioners talk about this, but to be perfectly candid, I don't put a lot of attention on this. Sometimes they'll tell you that, you know, that the heavy metals shouldn't be used in certain potencies and blah, 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 but I really don't pay much heed to this. But I put it in here just so you know that some practitioners do take this into consideration in determining potency and dose. The fourth factor is the nature of the disease. How aggressive, or what is the pace of that disease? Because if you've got a disease that's extremely aggressive with a very fast pace, you are going to have to give remedies quite frequently and oftentimes repeatedly, because the nature of the pathology is such that it uses up the energy of the medicine very rapidly. So for example, when you have advanced cancer cases and the person's symptoms are changing very quickly, what you oftentimes find is you have to repeat these remedies like literally every 15 minutes or 20 minutes or every hour, because they just don't last very long. It just, the remedies get used up very, very quickly. So if you've got a situation where the disease is very aggressive with a fast pace, you're going to have to repeat that remedy. And if you're going to have to do that, you're probably better off starting with a lower potency and moving your way up. And that way you have a lot of room to move up in the potencies, knowing that you're going to have to repeat this remedy quite a bit. The fifth factor that I would take into consideration is pathology. If there is real tissue pathology in the case, then I would avoid using the higher potencies and go back to the lower potencies. The more pathology and also suppression, which is the next criteria that you see in the case, the more chance you have of very, very intense aggravations. And I'll give you a good example of this. When I was early in my practice, this is going back close to 30 years ago, I had a patient who came in to see me who was some very serious pathology. She had cardiovascular issues. She had liver issues, some cirrhosis of the liver. She had really quite a bit of problems. And she had a long history of suppression with various types of allopathic drugs over a very long period of time. I took her case and decided to prescribe the remedy Lachesis. And I gave her 1 dose of Lachesis 200C. And within a few days, she developed boils all over her body, which were very, very intense and very painful and lasted almost 6 months. And she eventually did very well with the Lachesis, and a lot of her problems were completely removed. But the level of suffering that she had to go through that period of time, and my lack of experience as a practitioner did not allow me to help her. So I learned from many experiences, but that one in particular, early in my practice, that you must be very careful when you have a lot of tissue pathology and suppression to be careful about these higher potencies. You can see very intense aggravations that last for an extended period of time. So again, when you have pathology and when you have suppression, stay away from the higher potencies, go with the lower potencies, and build your way up. The last thing that I would take into consideration here are antidoting possibilities. And if you're thinking if there's any possibility of antidoting factors in the person's life, anything, then it could be like medication, stressful work life, or stressful situation at home, anything, then you're going to want to repeat that remedy daily. And if you're going to repeat it daily, then you're going to probably want to start off with the lower potencies. And does anybody else, if I'm going to repeat a remedy daily, what else must I do? Anybody tell me?
You should give it in water-based solutions, probably succuss the solutions and give it like that. Mm-hmm.
Very good. So in the 5th and 6th editions of the Organon, Hahnemann introduced an aphorism. It was aphorism 247, where basically he wrote, "It is an unexecutable project to repeat the same unmodified dose once, let alone many times." And so what he was saying there was that if you're going to repeat the remedy, you have to change the potency between each dose. And he says that if you don't do that, you can add dissimilar symptoms from that remedy that the patient doesn't have onto the life force of that particular person, and this can create worse problems than they had even before starting to take the homeopathic remedy. So to basically eliminate that problem, he suggests that you put the remedy in solution and that you succuss between each dose. And when you do that, when you modify the dose, this particular issue of grafting on dissimilar symptoms goes away. This is something that was introduced into the 5th and 6th editions of the Organon. It's important to remember that after 1833, Hahnemann never gave a dry dose of a remedy again. From 1833 to 1843, he always put remedies in solution, and he always succussed between each of the doses. So, and for the reasons that I just explained before. Now, I can tell you from my own experience that this issue of grafting on dissimilar symptoms from the remedy is most applicable in people who tend to be more sensitive. I have not seen this to be such an issue with people of normal sensitivity or who are hyposensitive, but if you tend to be more sensitive or hypersensitive, I have seen this issue quite a bit. My mom, who originally I treated with nitricum acidum, did very well on that remedy, but after a period of time, because I was giving her the same potencies over and over and over again, 6, 12, 30s over and over and over again, she eventually, over a period of a number of months, developed anxiety about health, which she had never had before, which of course is a big symptom of nitric acid. So nitric acid had imprinted onto her life force this anxiety about health. And it took me quite a while to be able to help her with that. I finally gave her the remedy calicarbonicum, which removed that anxiety. But it was a quite difficult experience, and I learned that with more sensitive patients, you can have these types of things come up, as Hahnemann described in aphorism 247. So, any comments or thoughts or questions about anything I've just shared so far before we move on?
Kim, I had one question. Samir again.
Yes, Samir, please.
So what I've also observed sometimes is, you know, certain patients happen to be dose sensitive and certain patients happen to be potency sensitive. So in the sense that certain patients would be fine with higher potencies as long as the size of the dose has been reduced to the right amount. And certain patients, no matter what you do, as long as it's a higher potency, they will completely, you know, react wildly to it. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that topic as well.
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting because if you look at, I think both factors are important, both dose and potency. They both play a role. If you read Kent's writings, Kent will basically tell you that it doesn't matter. Kent was a Swedenborgian, and he believed in the Swedenborgian concept of simple substance. And so for him, it was only the quality of the potency that mattered, and the actual physical dose made no difference whatsoever. So if you read Kent's writings, like in his lesser writings or in his lectures on homeopathic philosophy, you'll see that he actually says, it doesn't matter whether you give 1 pill or 100 pills, it doesn't matter if you put it in fluid or don't put it in fluid. He says none of that makes any difference whatsoever. But for Hahnemann in the Organon, he makes it very clear that both the dose and the potency matter, and that if you give too large a dose, that this can be quite problematic for the individual. So I have basically followed Hahnemann's position on this, and I have found that both dose and potency make a difference. And I'm cautious about both of those. That's why when I prepare the remedy in solution, I only put 2 pellets in there. That's generally what is suggested, because they say, well, maybe one of the pellets isn't medicated, so just put 2 in there just in case. And I also use the number 10 pellets, which are the smallest size pellets. So yeah, from my experience, they both matter, and I try to give the minimum dose, and I try to be very careful about potency based on the criteria that I mentioned previously.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, when you start with a sort of a conservative dose, both these things can be dialed up if needed, but
Exactly.
I guess it's better to start. Even the succussions I have found matter, you know, like it's like 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, that can completely make a difference. Yeah, yeah. It becomes sort of
I totally agree.
Very artistic thing in the end if you play with these solutions, you know, like you have to master the potency, the size of the dose, dilution cups, number of succussions, repetition frequency. It's a very, very intricate thing, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think there are guidelines that we can use to help us make good choices. So let's look at this particular case, okay? So does anybody have any suggestions on what you would do in this particular case? We're going to give Metarhinon, right? What potency would you suggest? Here's the criteria that we would use. Are we certain of the remedy?
I think we are certain.
Yeah, we are, right?
Yeah.
What about the sensitivity of the patient?
Medium.
Medium. I think that's about right. Yeah. What about antidoting possibilities?
Why not start really low?
I think we should start really low, but what about antidoting possibilities? Is there a chance of the remedy being antidoted?
Yes. With the
so what does that mean we have to do then?
Frequent repetition.
If we have to repeat the remedy on a daily basis, right, what are we going to have to do?
LM potencies?
So first of all, let's not use the word LM. Let's avoid that term altogether if we can. It's a completely inaccurate terminology. Does everybody know why?
No.
No.
Okay. So in Roman numerology, okay, M is what number?
1,000.
1,000. And L is what number?
50.
50. So what number is LM?
50.
What number is it in Roman numerology?
50,000.
No, it's not. In Roman numerology, you subtract the first letter from the second letter.
Oh.
So LN is the number 950.
Oh.
Does that have anything to do with 50,000? It has nothing to do with it. Hahnemann never referred to them as LM potencies. Hahnemann referred to them as medicamol or globule or 50 millesimal. He never used the word LM. That came in afterwards. The correct terminology is a Q potency. Q is in Roman numerology 50,000. So you should always call it Q potencies. Now you might think, oh, he's being overly pedantic here, but I'll tell you why this is very important. We want to be recognized by the scientific community. If somebody comes along and asks you about your potency scales, and they ask you why you call this an LM, and you tell them because it's 50,000, somebody who is scientifically trained will laugh at you. And we completely discredit ourselves by using such a term. So we should never use LM, we should always use Q potency.
Okay.
So let's talk. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so listen. Well, we could use acute potency. It is possible. What is the difference between the 5th edition of the Organon and the 6th edition? Well, first of all, what's the difference between the 4th edition of the Organon and the 5th edition of the Organon as it relates to posology? Does anybody know?
Yeah. 4th is give the remedy dry, wait and watch till there is a complete, like there is a relapse. 5th is see potencies in water. You can repeat as long as you can. I mean, you reach a plateau and you want to move the case along. You succuss and give the remedy. I mean, there is wait and watch involved in 5th as well, but you can still repeat as needed to hasten the cure. And
Very
6th
good,
is
very good.
6th,
Obviously, Samir, you're familiar with this, so I'll summarize it really quickly. There are 3 fundamental differences between the 4th edition of the Organon and the 5th edition of the Organon as it relates to posology. Number 1, in the 5th edition of the Organon, you begin to see the use of higher potencies, which is not the case in the 4th edition of the Organon. Number 2, it is recommended in the 5th edition of the Organon to put the remedies in solution. And number 3, you can repeat the remedy even while the patient is improving, which you cannot do in the 4th edition. You have to wait and wait and wait with the dry dose until the action of the remedy has completed itself. Of those 3 changes, the only one that got adopted by most homeopaths was the use of higher potencies. Most homeopaths, Kent included, did not adopt the idea of putting the remedies in solution or giving the remedy while the patient was still improving. There are some reasons for this. One is that, well, first of all, why did Kent never talk about the Q potencies? Does anybody know?
I think the 6th edition got published posthumously later. It was not even out, right? In Kent's time?
Yeah, exactly. Kent dies on June 6, 1916, and the 6th edition of the Organon is published in 1921. So it's published 5 years after he dies. He never gets to see it. He doesn't know about Q potencies. He never hears about them. Doesn't know about them. Okay, but he does. There is an English translation of the 5th edition of the Organon where Hahnemann introduces the idea of water potencies and giving the remedy while the patient is improving. But for whatever reason, Kent decides to ignore it and continues to use the dry dose and wait approach of the 4th edition. And because he's such a leader of homeopathy, basically all the people who follow him continue to do that. It's really only in the 1970s and 1980s that we began to become reacquainted with the use of the Q potencies as described in the 6th edition of the Organon, and even the use of the remedies in solution. Okay, so Hahnemann in the 6th edition of the Organon advocates the use of the Q potencies in basically the same way that he recommends the use of the C potencies in the 5th edition of the Organon. Very, very similar. So should we only use the Q potencies? Because in the 6th edition of the Organon, Hahnemann recommends that this is the best posology potency method, is the Q potencies. So should we only use those?
I don't think so. I mean, I think.
Why not?
Because there are cases where, the slightly, I shouldn't use the word aggressive, but the slightly greater push of the C potencies tends to create better results. I mean, in solution, I'm talking about compared to
Sure.
LMs, not the LMs, 50 millisimoles of the 6th edition. So I think both scales have their place, and we should embrace both of them and use them as needed.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It's very interesting that even though Hahnemann in the 6th edition of the Organon advocates that the Q potencies are the best approach, he continued until the very end of his life to use the C potencies. So the very end. And as a matter of fact, the remedy kit that was found at his bedside only had C potencies. Up to what potency? Does anybody know? In his own personal remedy kit, what was the highest potency he had?
I would guess 30 or a 200.
30.
Yeah.
30. Hahnemann rarely used above a 30C. Only in a very few occasions he experimented with a 60th potency and a little bit higher, but basically he almost only used up to the 30th potency. So this is just interesting historical information to be aware of in terms of using the Q or the C potencies. Okay. All right. So what did I decide to do in this particular case? Well, I decided to start with Medorrhinum, 12C BID, so twice a day in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose. And, very important, I said don't do anything with the medication. Don't change it. Does that seem reasonable to everybody?
Mhm.
I have one question on this.
Sure.
There has been some thing in literature at times that don't prescribe no swords and sea potencies below a 30 or below, some authors will even say below a 200. In your experience, like even a
So I'm
12C?
familiar with those authors who write that, like
Yeah.
Swan and some of the other authors who
Yes.
make those communications. But from my point of view, I take the position that all the remedies are essentially the same and should be treated in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter where they derive from. It doesn't matter whether they derive from disease tissue or mineral kingdom or plant kingdom. I take the position it makes a difference.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and in my experience, it's works fine. I don't have any problems at all.
Okay.
So anyway, I gave 12C in solution. This is how you do it. You put the pellets in a bottle. You allow the pellets to dissolve. That can take a while. And then you decide to hit the bottle against the book to succuss it. You take a little bit out of the bottle. You put it into some water. You stir the water, and then you take a teaspoon of the water. And you're going to vary. This is the first dose is called the test dose. And that's the one that you're going to assess the response of. And depending on how the person responds, that's going to determine what you do later. So let's say we decide to give 12C, BID twice a day, and we put it in the bottle with alcohol and water, and then we put it in 4 ounces of water, and we haven't stirred, they take a teaspoon. And let's say nothing happens. Well, then, what you could do is the next time, instead of succussing it 7 times, you have them succuss it 10 times. Or instead of diluting in 4 ounces of water, you have them dilute in 2 ounces of water. So you have all of these various types of options to change and modify the potency. Let's say that the person just simply improves. Well, if they simply just improve, then you would just continue doing what you're doing because that's what you want. You want gentle, rapid, permanent improvement without aggravations, and if that's what you're getting, then you just continue doing what you were doing. If you see some type of an aggravation, let's say a mild aggravation, right, but with some improvement following, then you might say, okay, on the next dose, let's succuss it only 5 times, or let's dilute it in more water, or let's use Farouk Master's 5-cup method, where we dilute it from 1 cup to another, or let's use the olfactory method of having the person simply sniff it. But you have all of these types of options, which you don't have with the dry dose approach because you can't modify that dry pellet in this type of a way. This is the advantage of the water solutions in practice. Now, the factors that were most important for me in this particular case was the certainty of the remedy. I felt very confident about it, the nature of the disease, and then most important to me was the antidoting possibility of the medication, the lithobid, and knowing I have to repeat the remedy, and so I decided to do 12C BID. Could I have done 6C TID or BID or 30C? Yeah, I could have done all of those things. Those would have all been possibilities, but I guess in my gut I felt that 12C BID made the most sense. This is Aphorism 247, which I quoted to you previously. Hahnemann writes, it is an unexecutable approach to repeat the same unmodified dose of a medicine even once, let alone many times and at short intervals in cases where treatment ought not to be delayed. The like principle does not accept such entirely identical doses without opposition, that is, without other symptoms of the medicine, i.e. the ones not similar to those of the disease to be cured, becoming pronounced. And then he continues by writing, the previous dose has already carried out the expected alteration of the life principle's tunement, leaving a second unaltered, in other words, we didn't change the potency dose of the same medicine of entirely equal dynamization with nothing more to carry out on the life principle. The patient can only become sick in a different way by such an unmodified dose, fundamentally sicker than he already was, because now the only symptoms of the medicine that remain in effect are those not homeopathic, in other words, dissimilar to the original disease. The result is an actual aggravation of the patient's condition rather than progress towards cure. So Hahnemann is basically telling me, if you do this, don't change these potencies, you can make the patient actually worse. And then finally he writes, but as soon as one slightly modifies each new dose by dynamizing it to a somewhat higher degree of potency, the sick life principle allows itself to be further unburdened by the same medicine without ill effect, allowing itself to be further altered in its tuning its feeling of the natural disease is further decreased and it is thereby brought closer to cure. Okay.
Kim?
Yes, please.
Hi. Excuse me. Back
Julia.
if we can go to the beginning of that aphorism. Is it even possible to give? I'm going to script the writing, the wording here, but you can't repeat the dose to the same life force because the life force has been altered by that first dose. So you can then give the same dose because it is not the same life force receiving it.
Are you saying that you think you can repeat the remedy in the same potency? Is that what you're thinking?
I am.
No, that's not what he's saying here. Read it again.
I know, I understand what he says.
Yeah.
But the whole basis of this is that you alter the life force with one dose.
Yeah,
You've already altered the life force.
You alter the similar symptoms, right? But there are symptoms in that remedy which are dissimilar to your life force. And what will happen is those dissimilar symptoms will get added on if you don't change that potency.
I understand that, but I'm a fairly newbie to this, but I really question that aphorism because the whole point of it
I can tell you from personal experience that this is true, and I can tell you that Hahnemann would never put this in the 6th edition experience in the Organon unless he actually had this experience repeatedly.
Yes. I don't know. I'm very
you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it theoretically, and he's talking from a position of more than 40 years of clinical practice.
I get that. Yeah, but I look at like the Banerjee protocols and other things where they do repeat it, and you do get really good results. But I digress.
Well, we could talk about the Banerjee protocols because, in a sense, it's completely different from what's described in the Organon. There's some interesting aspects of it, but anyway, it's a whole different topic. Anyway, let me continue. So, 4th week follow-up. Jack is feeling better in general. The feeling of something missing from his soul has improved, and he can't put it into words, but somehow just feels better. So, what should we do here?
Continue.
Continue. Everybody agree?
Yes.
Yes. In aphorism 253 of the Organon, Hahnemann writes, in all diseases, especially the rapidly arising acute ones, the patient's emotional state and entire behavior are the surest and most enlightening of the signs showing a small beginning, not visible to everyone, of amelioration or aggravation. When there is an ever so slight beginning of improvement, the patient will demonstrate a greater degree of comfort, increasing composure, freedom of spirit, increased courage, a kind of returning naturalness. So this is very common. We see it in practice all the time. It's a very positive sign. That's exactly what he's describing. So we really don't want to do anything. There was no aggravation to speak of. He's gradually improving. We just continue. Why change anything? Exactly what we want to see. So yeah, Metarinum, 12C, BID before. But now, and nobody mentioned it, we start to lower the lithobid. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? He's taking, lithobid comes in 300 milligram tablets. So he's taking 5 300 milligram tablets. So I believe that we lowered him 1 tablet down to 1,500 milligrams. Okay? Everybody got that? Great. Okay. 7th week follow-up. Jack is still feeling better, but not as well as at last follow-up. Nothing else has changed. Now taking 1,500 milligrams of lithobid. So, what do we do?
Not. Yeah, that's what I would say. Mm-hmm.
Well, say it again.
Increase the potency.
Increase the potency. Okay, so one possibility. So if you were at 12C, BID. So if you were going to increase the potency, what would you go up to?
15 or 30. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
15 or 30. Okay, fair enough.
What about working on the posology and the dosing first, so you don't have to change the substance yet?
You could. We could increase the number of succussions. Would be a possibility. That's a possibility. We could dilute in less water. That's another possibility. I'll tell you one other thing, which is a possibility, which you should keep in mind, very important, is this happens very frequently. You know, the person, the patient is feeling a certain way, and you give them this homeopathic remedy, and there's such a profound shift in their overall feeling that they notice that they feel a lot better. Wow, that remedy was amazing. But over a period of a month or so, they become used to this way that they feel, and now they think, you know, I felt really amazing at the beginning, but now I don't feel as good as I did before. But in reality, they could feel just as good as they did before. It's just they became acclimated to feeling like this, and so they don't see that strong demarcation like they did initially. Does that make sense, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that is a possibility as well, and that would be an argument for just continuing the way you are going now. So I think the best argument is either continue or somehow increase the potency or succuss more or dilute less. Those are your options. I chose to go up to 30C BID. There had been no aggravation up to this point. I felt very confident about the remedy. I wanted to repeat it, so again, I want to put it in solution. So I went from 12 to 30. And at the 12-week follow-up, Jack says he feels more balanced emotionally. He hasn't felt this good in years. So what do we do?
Okay.
What should we do here?
So all symptoms are gone?
No, they're not all gone. He's quite a bit better, but he feels much better, but he still has these feeling of swings and now things aren't right. And also, what else?
Continue.
He's still on the medication, isn't he?
Yeah, so continue should be the good way. You know, like
Continue, and what else?
We
Wait.
with him.
What about the medication?
Go down on it.
Go down in the medication. As he's getting better, doing better, you want to simultaneously lower the medication. So we continue. At the 16-week follow-up, Jack is now taking 900 milligrams of Lithibid and feels better in general, but has noticed that during the last few weeks that he wakes up feeling depressed and irritable, and he has also been feeling much warmer than normal, and the sticky, those are the word that he used, the sticky summer has been driving him crazy. So, what do we do now?
you know, if symptoms are changing a little bit in terms of waking up depressed and irritable. These are new symptoms that have come up, and the sticky summer aggravation has come up. So might be a time to reevaluate the symptoms and see if a new layer has come up, or medorinum still covers the current state or not.
Yeah, very good. Now, I can tell you, if you are James Tyler Kent in this particular situation, does anybody know if you're James Tyler Kent, what do you do? Anybody know?
He would wait.
You wait. That never changes the remedy, even when the symptoms have changed, if the remedy has shown action in the case. He doesn't change it. Hahnemann is much more inclined to change the remedy when the symptom picture changes, regardless of the impact of the remedy that was given previously. Okay? So just be aware of that. Remember, now I decided, yeah, go ahead.
Kim, are you saying that if the symptoms are still touching the case, even though it's less, and we have these symptoms that are kind of coming back a little more, you could still wait?
If you were James Tyler Kent in this situation, even if the picture had completely changed and pointed clearly to another remedy, clearly, okay, he would still give that previous remedy another chance to act.
Yep.
Hahnemann would not do that. Hahnemann would simply switch based on the new symptom picture.
I mean,
Did anything else change? I would probably retake the case and see what else changed. Or did everything else stay the same?
Right. And what I would tell you is, what Kent would tell you is it wouldn't even matter if everything pointed clearly to another remedy. If that previous remedy, which no longer fit the symptom picture, worked before, you would give it another dose. That's what he would tell you.
Mm.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's right. I'm just telling you that's the way you approach it.
And how would Hahnemann make that call?
No, Hahnemann would change much more quickly. Hahnemann would rely on the symptom picture much more in this situation. Kent would keep trying that previous remedy to see if it had completely worked as much as it could before switching. Hahnemann would be more inclined to switch.
The symptoms that he's portraying now, I mean, it's like a related remedy to Medurinum, natrum sulfuricum looks like coming up. But again, I think probably continuing still for a little bit more and being sure
you could
of that.
switch. It's a judgment call here. You could either choose to switch or you could decide to give a different remedy. There is some indication of a new remedy coming up, as Samir is mentioning here. So, so you could go with that or you could wait. Now, I decided to continue because it wasn't anything that terrible. I thought, let's just see what happens. Let's continue. And that's because of what Hahnemann writes in Aphorism 156, wherein he says, meanwhile, especially when the dose is not sufficiently diminished, there is seldom a medication, even one that is apparently fittingly selected homeopathically, that does not bring to pass an irritable and fine-feeling patient at least one small ailment which is not habitual for the patient, a small new symptom during the duration of its action. This is because it is almost impossible for the symptoms of the medicine and those of the disease to cover one another as exactly as two triangles with equal sides and angles. In a good case, however, this insignificant deviation is easily wiped away by the living organism's own energy activity. It does so without even being noticed by patients, except those of immoderate delicacy. In any case, the restoration proceeds on to the goal of recovery as long as it is not hindered by foreign medicinal influences on the patient, by errors in regimen or through passions. So he's saying that, the remedies don't fit perfectly, and very often you do see one or more symptoms arise that are dissimilar, but that these eventually just go away on their own. That's essentially what he's communicating here. And so I thought, well, maybe that's what these new symptoms are. Maybe they're symptoms of the remedy that are just coming up and they'll just go away. Let's wait it out a little bit and see what happens. But at the 20-week follow-up, Jack is still taking 900 milligrams of Lithobid, but now he's started feeling really depressed. And he's even been having thoughts of suicide. And it's especially bad in the morning when he feels very depressed and irritable. He's also feeling very warm and can't stand the summer dampness. So what do you feel now?
I think natrum sulfuricum now for sure.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, do we change the remedy now? First question, do we change the remedy?
I think yes, because suicidal. It's like now things are more severe, Yeah.
Right. Hold on a second. Hello? Good morning. Yeah, I'm on the call right now. Let me call you back, please. This is Nina. Yeah, Nina, I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you as soon as I finish my class. Okay? No worries. Do you have a WhatsApp by chance? I will call you back in a little bit. Okay? Sorry about that. It's a patient. Anyway, so the situation for me is different. Look at what Hahnemann writes in Aphorism 248 here. He says, if the patient undergoes one or another important ailment that he never had before in his life, and the rest of the disease appears in a group of altered symptoms, then another medicine more homeopathically appropriate must now be selected in place of the one that was used. The new medicine should be administered in just such repeated doses. Again, each dose of the solution should be modified with the proper vigorous percussions in order to somewhat alter and heighten its degree of potency. And that's what I see here happening here. These are very unwelcome symptoms in the case. And so we need to switch to a different remedy. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah. And also, in this case, like the symptoms are corresponding to a very complementary remedy to Medurinum. So that is a very good sign as well,
Awesome. Awesome. Did everybody hear what Samir said?
Yes.
Besides Samir, does anybody else know what remedy is coming up here? I'll show you. Okay. So the symptoms that I thought were important were the thoughts of suicide, feeling bad in the morning, depressed and irritable, very warm. Remember, he was cold before, very warm. And when you have general physical modalities, body temperature modalities changing like that, those are very important. You always pay very close attention to those. And also, you can't stand the summer dampness. So based on those new symptoms that are either being more pronounced or new in the case, I decided to go with natrum sulfuricum, 6E, 3 times a day in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose. Here you can see a repertorization of the case, suicidal dispositions thoughts. There you see natural sulfuricum in bold type. Sadness in the morning, of course, it's a big morning remedy, and irritability in the morning. And then also, it's one of the top remedies for aggravation from rainy, wet, damp weather. Here you can see below from Berkey, he writes, they are worse in rainy weather, water in any form. So to me, it was a very clear case of natural sulfuricum. And also, as Samir mentioned, natural sulfuricum is an important complementary remedy to medelinum. So that further confirms the prescriptions. Not just the symptoms are pointing to natural sulfuricum, but even the fact that this is a well-known complementary remedy. And I decided to go low potency because, you know, again, I'm always happy to start lower and move up as I go along. 25-week follow-up. Jack is now taking 600 milligrams of Lithobid and is feeling fantastic. His suicidal thoughts are gone, but he still wakes up in the morning feeling tired and somewhat low. He's also not as bothered by the heat or humidity. So, what do we do here?
Continue the same.
Continue as before. And of course, lower the medication. 30-week follow-up. Jack has completely stopped taking Lithobid and is still feeling fantastic. His suicidal thoughts are totally gone, and although he still feels tired in the morning, it is not as bad as before. Your thoughts?
Continue.
Yeah.
So I told him to continue the natural sulfuricum 6C only when he feels it is needed. And to me, this is one of the advantages of the water solution potencies, is that, first of all, you minimize the aggravations, which is really important. But secondarily, as the person begins to get better, they become very sensitive to when they need a dose of the remedy. And so when they're really getting really, really well, you can simply tell them, look, if you feel that you need the remedy, just take another dose. And if you feel you don't need it, don't take it. And so that's very common for me with these water potencies towards the end of the treatment process. 36-week follow-up. Jack is feeling really well on all levels. He's not experienced any major mood swings and feels much more composed and balanced. And there was, I told him, I said, look, you know, unless you really feel you need to take a remedy, don't take anything, because he was just doing so well at this point. So 36 weeks, so like 3/4 of a year, basically, to bring about this type of a result. Any questions?
Yeah, that's a great result.
Yeah.
Kim, I have a question. Is there a way you could get closer to the microphone?
The problem is I have a new computer. I've had really terrible computer problems, and I'm right on top of my computer, and I don't have an external microphone, unfortunately. So I don't know what else to do. I'm sorry. Is there some way I could test it? Yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know. Can you hear me okay, Barbara? I'll try to yell.
I can hear you okay. There were a few comments about the sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Go get it.
It's crazy. All right, let's do another case. All right. I always find it's a good way to go through it. All right, let's. All right, let's do this case. No, actually, let's do this case. It's better. All right. Okay, so this is a case of a 38-year-old woman with severe depression, and who came to see me for depression and anxiety. She had gone through a great number of challenges during her childhood, including being both dominated and neglected by her parents. She was also sexually molested by her older brother when she was around 7 or 8 years of age. And there was a lot of denial about this in the family, and the topic was completely taboo. When she was in her early teens, she became sexually active, and by her late teens had become quite promiscuous. In addition, she tended to get involved with men who were both abusive and emotionally distant. She even had a few sexual relationships which involved S&M, that's sadomasochism, and other sexual fetishes to which she had become addicted. Eventually, this became the only sexual activity that would get her aroused. In her mid-20s, she married an older man who was extremely possessive and dominating. She finally left him after 5 years and described that period of her life as extremely oppressive. Even though she was afraid of being abandoned by her husband, she also had on repeated occasions in the past the impulse to kill him. She would even fantasize about taking a knife and stabbing him in the chest. During the last few years, she has gone through periods of desperately needing to have sex and would go out to bars and pick up guys for one-night stands. She could get involved in some very kinky stuff, but afterwards always felt depressed and empty. By her late 20s, she started developing a number of health issues, including stomach issues. It was as if she was sensitive to everything she ate. She had a lot of heartburn, bloating, and diarrhea. Drinking a cup of hot tea would tend to settle her stomach and reduce the pain. During this time, she also developed chemical sensitivities and was aggravated by perfumes, incense, most strong odors, most chemicals, etc. This made her life impossible, as she could hardly go out without experiencing extreme anxiety. She was worried about everything and could hardly keep still. Even during sleep, she would wake up frequently with tremendous anxiety, sadness, and a feeling of desperation. It had gotten so bad that she now seriously considered ending her life. Life had become a burden, and she said she felt hopeless and in a state of despair. She would seriously think about suicide and wanting to end it all. She was certain she would never get out of this situation of endless anxiety and depression. She describes herself as being extremely selfish and self-concerned with a lot of obsessions, especially about her health and death. She says that she can treat others very badly with a lot of contempt at times. She tends to be chilly and prefers warm weather. Her favorite foods are sweets, pasta, ice cream, pizza, breads, and eggs. She tends to be fairly thirsty and drinks a lot of tea with milk during the day. She usually sleeps on her left or right side and tends to wake up unrefreshed. So what would you feel is important in this particular case? What would you focus on?
Well, the sexuality.
Okay, tell me about that. What symptoms would you use? What rubrics could you use?
I mean, the etiology, the sexual abuse is very important.
There are rubrics in our repertory for ailments from abuse.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
There's a whole bunch of remedies in there. Staphysagria, thuya, metalinum, lactophilinum, lactaninum, all those remedies are in that particular rubric. And you could use that rubric as a possible choice. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
What else?
Impulse to kill, the amelioration from warm drinks.
Wait, impulse to kill. You got even a better rubric than impulse to kill. What do you have besides impulse to kill?
Kill, desire to knife with a...
Yeah, you got a very specific rubric. Impulse to kill with a knife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody know some of the remedies in there?
Lycopodium?
Lycopodium is not one of the top remedies. What's a bigger remedy than lycopodium? Much bigger.
In that rubric with a knife, alumina, mercury,
alumina, mercury,
yeah,
platina,
iocyanus,
arsenicum, right? Those will be the remedies we think of very strongly. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but in synthesis, in radar, lycopodium shows up as a grade 3 in that rubric to me, but I don't know.
Who's the author? Where's the edition come from?
Jean-Pierre Gallavardine.
Ah, that's why.
Yeah.
Do you trust Gallavardin as a practitioner?
I don't know.
No, he's not a trustworthy source of information, just so you know.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. And, maybe he has some experience. I don't know. I haven't seen it with lycopodium, but it's not a well-known remedy for that, just so you know. Okay. What else? What else about her sexuality? Is it just normal sex, or is it?
Yeah, it can go to love, perversity of. You can use.
Yes, there's a rubric.
Maniacal.
Yeah.
Yes, love of perversity. Very good. That's a good rubric to use in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So you got love and preserve, you got a rubric about fetishes, you got all these types of rubrics that you could think about. Abuse, hypersexuality, nymphomania, all of those are possible choices, right?
Mhm.
Okay, what else?
Yeah, I mean, contemptuousness, yeah. Mhm.
What about her person? What did she say about herself? What kind of person is she?
Self-
What is it?
Selfish.
Selfish,
Selfish.
self-centered. Treats others with contempt, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because we don't have a lot of time, any thoughts on remedies?
Platina.
Platina. Does everybody, who suggested Platina?
Namaka.
Namaka. Does everybody see why she suggested Platina? Can everybody see that? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here.
The haughtiness.
The haughtiness,
Haughtiness.
the homosexual stuff, the suicidal stuff, the anxiety, the impulse to kill.
Impulse to kill.
Impulse to kill with a knife. I mean, boy, that seems to be a
Yeah.
good case for Platina. So let's look at the follow-up. And yeah, I decided Platina 30C, 1 dose. Here's a repertorization. This is from Radar. But you could, it would come out the same way in McRepertory or Homeopathy or any, it doesn't matter which program you use, it'd be all the same. But here you can see ailments from sexual abuse, love of perversity, nymphomania, increased libido, suicidal disposition, selfishness, egoism, contemptuous, and desire to kill with a knife. The only remedy that runs through all of those rubrics is Platina. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So why I was fairly certain of the remedy, that's why I went with a 30. I was concerned about the sensitivity of the patient, and especially people who are psychologically like this. I tend to be careful about too high a potency. I felt 30 felt comfortable to me, and also the pathology wasn't too bad. I just thought the 30 felt right, and I just wanted to give 1 dose of the 30 and see what would happen. The 5-week follow-up, the patient comes into the office and says she hasn't noticed any changes. She says her state is exactly as before. So what do you do?
Make sure that's actually true. Take the case.
Very good. Excellent. That's the first thing you do, because patients, listen, if you have a phosphorus patient, somebody who needs the remedy phosphorus, and they come into you, and you give them the wrong remedy, and they come back into your office, what are they going to tell you?
That they're better.
They're going to say, thank you so much. That remedy was amazing. You're a miracle worker. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay? You can't trust them. You have to go through your written documented case to see what the reality is. What if they need a remedy like bryonia or calicarbonicum or calibichromicum or conium, right? And you give them a remedy. They're going to come in, you know what they're going to tell you? Even if this is the right remedy and there's improvement, they're going to tell you, oh, there's no change at all. Because those people don't like to admit these types of changes. So again, you go through their case and you say, well, you were impotent before. What's going on? Well, I'm having sex 2 or 3 times a week now. Oh, you think that could be the remedy? I mean, that's the type of craziness that you'll hear in these types of situations. So you have to absolutely check and see if it's true. And I did check, and I did look for obstacles to cure that could have prevented the remedy from working. And I felt that there was nothing there, and that really there had been no change. So based on that, what would you do?
Try a higher potency.
Yeah, it's exactly what I did.
Little higher.
Yeah, exactly. I decided to go because I felt very confident about the remedy, and so I said, let's go up to 200C, 1 dose. Again, certainty of the remedy was my most important criteria here. I felt very confident. It seemed to fit the case really, really well. So I said, I have to go up. I'm not going to abandon this remedy. 9-week follow-up. Patient is feeling very depressed and suicidal. Has been cutting herself. Now she never did this before. Has been cutting herself. Everything seems more intense than before. The patient also reports a new sensation of numbness around her lips. She cannot remember experiencing this before. She is also feeling very aggravated in herself and angry and displeased with everyone around her. What do we do here?
Sorry, what was the frequency of repetition?
1 dose.
Or just 1 dose of Platina
1 dose of
200C?
200C.
This seems like a wrong remedy to me now.
That's exactly correct. Look, if you look at these symptoms, depression, suicide, that's the wrong direction. Cutting herself, a new symptom, which is really bad, has come up. What does anybody know the numbness around her lips? What remedy is that? Is that a keynote of? That's a keynote of Platina.
Yeah, so she's proving that remedy almost.
She's
Yeah.
also proving Platina now on top of it.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see what's happening here. Okay, and she's in a much worse state than she was before. Again, in 249, Hahnemann writes, every medicine prescribed for a case of disease which, in the course of its action, brings forth new and troublesome symptoms that are not peculiar to the disease to be cured is not capable of engendering true improvement. Such a medicine is not to be deemed as homeopathically selected. So this is not the right remedy, even though it appears to be the correct remedy. Based on what's happening and the evidence being presented by the life force, we can clearly see that we are going to have to do something different in this situation. And he says in 249, continuing, if the aggravation is significant, it should be partly extinguished by an antidote given as soon as possible. Then the next means. What does he mean by next means? What does that mean? The next remedy should be given, the correct homeopathic remedy. Okay? And then he says, if the troublesome symptoms are not all too violently adverse, then the next means should be administered at once. In other words, the next remedy, the correct remedy should be administered. My own personal experience is that the next remedy is always the best antidote. The correct remedy is always the best antidote when you have an aggravation. In aphorism 250, he continues by saying, in these cases, it is not only permitted, but the physician is duty-bound to make good the mistake he has made by selecting and administering a homeopathic remedy which is not merely tolerably fitting, but which is the most appropriate possible for the present disease state, i.e. the disease state as it now appears with the old symptoms that remain and the new symptoms. So, here's our situation. What do we do? Any thoughts? Okay, let me demonstrate to you now how brilliant Hahnemann was and how a rereading of the Organon at least once and probably twice a year benefits every student and practitioner of homeopathy. You know, Adolf Lippe, who I mentioned earlier, is considered by many people to be the greatest homeopathic prescriber who lived. He was called the Ajax of homeopathy, like that Greek general. He would drive into battle and defeat all of his foes. And in 50 years of busy practice, Lippe never lost one typhoid, cholera, or malaria patient. 50 years, he never lost one case. And he read the Organon twice a year for 50 years. And after 50 years, he said, I'm now just beginning to fully understand the Organon, which gives you a sense of the depth of genius contained in that work, which is not immediately recognizable until you've been in practice for a while and have reread it multiple times. In aphorisms 210 to 230 of the Organon, Hahnemann talks about the treatment of mental and emotional diseases. It's a brilliant section of the Organon. It's way ahead of its time. I mean, it even talks about psychosomatic disease, which no one even is aware. It's not even on the radar screen yet. And in aphorism 224, he writes, if the mental disease is not yet fully developed, and if there is still some doubt as to whether it arose from somatic suffering, in other words, a mistunement of the patient's life force, or whether it stemmed from faulty upbringing, bad habits, perverted morality, neglect of the spirit, superstitions, or ignorance, the way to decide the point is as follows. 1. If it stems from the latter, faulty upbringing, bad habits, etc., then the mental disease will subside and improve with understanding, well-intentioned exhortations, consolation, or with earnest and rational expostulations. 2. If it is a mental or emotional disease that is really based upon a somatic disease, in other words, it's the result of the mistunement of the patient's life force, it will rapidly worsen with such treatment. In other words, you cannot talk a schizophrenic out of being a schizophrenic. Try it. They just become worse. You cannot change, you cannot talk somebody out of a mistuned life force. They become aggravated. You understand? So the melancholic patient will become still more downcast, plaintive, disconsolate, and withdrawn. Someone who is maliciously insane will become still more embittered, and senseless talk will become obviously more nonsensical. Before I continue, let me ask everybody a question. If you have a patient that comes in who's very well dressed, incredibly perfect, everything's designer jeans, their hat matches their shoes, which matches their belt buckle, which matches the umbrella handle, and they are the most perfectly immaculate, fastidious person you've ever met in terms of their dress attire, is that important for finding the remedy?
Yes.
Other thoughts?
It's part of the whole picture.
What if that person came from a socioeconomic background or a country like Japan where everybody tends to dress really well because that's what's expected in that culture or that socioeconomic level? Does it still matter?
Not really.
Yeah.
It's learned behavior. How does it matter? That's what Hahnemann is saying here. He's saying that your behavior can result from the mistunement of your life force, or it can be learned. And you must make a distinction between those two. If you do not, you will include information which has nothing to do with the remedy required. Do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about the situation with her, and look what she says here. She says she had gone through a number of great challenges during her childhood, including being both dominated and neglected by her parents. She was also sexually molested by her older brother. So I thought maybe this behavior is just learned stuff, and it's not part of her picture. I thought, let's just remove that from the case.
Okay.
And what do I have? I have haughtiness, contemptuousness, suicidal disposition, selfishness, despair of recovery, desire to kill with a knife, anxiety about health, fear of death, restlessness, nervousness, and stomach warm drinks ameliorate. And you'll also notice that arsenicum is in this new symptom, mutilating their body. You see this? Mm-hmm. So it's Hahnemann's intelligence and wisdom in aphorism 224 that allowed me to say, hold on a second, maybe I shouldn't take this mental and emotional behavior into consideration. Maybe this is learned behavior and not part of the symptom picture. And when I removed it, arsenicum became a very clear choice. Burning pains in the stomach, better hot. What's the first remedy you think of for burning pains that are better from heat?
Arsenicum.
Arsenicum.
Yeah. So I decided to give arsenicum 12C, BID twice a day, succumbing 7 times between each dose. 13-week follow-up, the patient is now feeling improved and less depressed. She says she is about 50% better than before the remedy. I think everybody knows that in a situation like this, you continue, so you just continue. 18-week follow-up, patients continue to improve, reports no suicidal tendency, and the depression is about 80% better. Again, we continue, I think it's fairly obvious. 23-week follow-up, the patient is now about 50% improved since the arsenicum prescription. She reports both her anxiety and depression have begun to return. What do we do?
Raise the
Increase the potency.
Yeah, we increase the potency. She was doing well. Now it's starting to coming back, so we increased. We went from 12C to 30C, BID twice a day, 7 percussions between each dose. 27-week follow-up, the patient is back to 80% to 90% improved. Hardly any anxiety or depression. I think everybody knows that we continue here. 33-week follow-up, patient is reporting no anxiety or depression. However, lately has been experiencing a great deal of heartburn and general stomach discomfort. They also report waking up between 1 to 3 a.m. and having difficulty falling back asleep. So what do we do here?
She's proving arsenicum.
So what do we do?
Wait, stop.
Good. Again, Hahnemann always has the answer for us in all of these situations in the Organon. We would stop the remedy and only redose if the anxiety and depression symptoms return. In general, this person is doing much better. It's not like the previous case or earlier in this case where the patient was getting really fundamentally worse. In general, this patient is much better. It's just there's some accessory symptoms that we identify with arsenicum that are coming up. And Hahnemann writes in aphorism 248 that if the so-called homeopathic aggravations appear towards the end of the treatment of a chronic disease, after almost daily repetition of the fully homeopathically fitting medicine, which in this case it is, so that the remaining disease symptoms seem to be somewhat heightened, then this is an indication that the medicinal disease, which is so similar to the original disease, is now almost audible by itself. Therefore, the doses must be reduced still more and repeated at longer intervals, or even entirely suspended for several days in order to see whether or not any more medicine is needed for recovery. If no more medicine is needed, these apparent symptoms stemming merely from the overflow of the homeopathic medicine will soon disappear by themselves, leaving behind unclouded health. So he's describing exactly what we see in the end of the cases like this, where you have these additional, they're not really critical, important symptoms, but they're coming up and they can be bothersome. So you stop. 44-week follow-up, the patient reporting no anxiety, depression, stomach discomfort, and frequencies have completely disappeared. So obviously we wait. And this patient, I've not prescribed any more remedies. She's doing really, really well on pretty much all levels at this point. I did ask her to get some type of therapy to address some of the other issues in her life, but in general, on a health level, she's doing really, really well. Okay, I see that we're over time. Are there any questions that I could answer for anybody about anything that we've talked about? Again, this is a vast topic with many different facets associated with it, but I hope I gave you a little bit of a sense of how I look at it. I use both the C and Q potencies. I tend to use more C potencies in general because I have a larger pharmacy, but I use them both. I almost always use remedies in solution unless there's no pathology and I'm going to give a higher potency. I'll sometimes just do one dose of a dry potency. Hahnemann said that the liquid potencies not only are safer and more gentle, but they actually act more deeply because there's more mucous membrane area that is affected by the liquid dose. So are there any final questions that I could answer for anybody, or comments? Or
I have one question.
Please.
So let's say if you have a case where, you're very confident of the remedy and, the patient doesn't seem like a hypersensitive, and you start with a 200C or a 1M, a very deep mental emotional symptom case, but the remedy only holds for 1 week in that high potency as well, like 1M. What do you do in such a case? Like, do you even go higher?
Yeah, that's a huge topic. It depends on a number of different factors that you would have to assess.
Can you go lower in potency in such a case? Like after starting?
There are some homeopaths that do that. You could go with a lower potency and repeat. That would be a possibility. Generally speaking, if you give a 1M and it only holds for a period of time, oftentimes you will need to give what is referred to as a intermittent remedy. It may not even necessarily match the symptom picture of the case, but it might unblock the case so that the well-selected remedy acts. So there's a rubric in the general section of your repertoire called remedies lack of reaction. Lack of reaction. So and there's a lot of remedies in that rubric. All the nozodes are in that rubric. Carboveg is in that rubric. So let's say, for example, you have a case. It's the most perfect lycopodium case you've ever seen. It's God and Hahnemann have personally sent this case to you because they care about you so much, and it's as if the person is reading Alan's keynotes, to you. It's the most perfect lycopodium case you've ever seen, and you give lycopodium, and either the lycopodium doesn't work at all, or as you're describing, it only works for a week and then it stops working, and even when you repeat it again, it doesn't seem to work very long or at all. And then you look at the overall case and you notice that there's bloating, as you oftentimes find in lycopodium, but the person likes to have the fan on when they're in your consulting room. And you also notice a little bit of blueness in the fingertips. And those are all, of course, symptoms associated with carbovegetabolus. And carbovegetabolus is in bold type in that rubric for lack of reaction. And then you remember that carboveg is a complementary to lycopodium. And so what you do is you give a dose of carboveg, and oftentimes what will happen is the case will just improve with carboveg. But sometimes what will happen is the carboveg won't do anything at all, nothing will happen. But when you repeat the lycopodium, it now works better. It works for a longer period of time.
Correct.
So
okay.
and this happens in practice, and it's one of the things. I'm not saying that's what you need to do in your particular situation, but that would be one of the things to take into consideration as a possible thing. The nosos are they're very commonly employed for this purpose.
Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So I did a whole class on case management, follow-up prescriptions, and things of that nature, and I go into all of those issues in great detail. Well, I guess we're out of time, but I want to thank everybody for your excellent participation and questions. I hope this was helpful to you. Barbara, thank you for having me on. I love that topic.
Kim, thank you for having you on. It's been a long time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, you guys are going to a great school, so you're very fortunate to be studying with Barbara and the other teachers there.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Bye,
Thanks a
everybody.
lot.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah.
Thank you,
you.
Kim. It was wonderful.
Bye, everyone.